Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. We've been exploring the book Elizabeth and Margaret, and it's been very interesting. The last video had the marriage of Margaret and Tony over with, and she was still seeing Roddy, and Tony was seeing his future wife. So let's see what happens next. Princess Margaret, in the summer of 1978, she was in the South Pacific to represent the Queen at the granting of independence to the island of Tuvalu. But she became ill with viral pneumonia and very nearly died, as she put it. She was flown to a Sydney hospital and recuperated for 9 days before continuing her program, and she didn't want to let anybody down. In December 1978, Tony Armstrong Jones, Princess Margaret's ex-husband, had married his lover, Lucy Lindsay Hogg. It happened just 5 months after the divorce. Princess Margaret was shocked that he had moved on so fast. That didn't stop him from being a favorite of the royal family. The Queen Mother invited him to Royal Lodge for a festive lunch, and Princess Margaret realized that they would continue to idolize her ex-husband and never accept Roddy. The royal family accepted the fact that Roddy brought comfort to Princess Margaret. He was entertained at Royal Lodge from time to time, but she refused to invite him to any of her private homes, the Queen Mother, that is. Roddy only met the Queen once. It was in embarrassing circumstances. He was wearing only a shirt and underpants, and he was trying to find the Snowdens' nanny to sew on a button. Roddy found her with the Queen. He said to the Queen, "Please forgive me, ma'am. I look so awful." The Queen said, "Don't worry. I don't look very good myself," and she politely left the room. There was a rift in the family when he was to be at Margaret's 50th birthday party. Princess Margaret wanted him there, but the Queen didn't. She felt his presence would overshadow the party itself. The public had come to view Princess Margaret in a negative light. When she was on a visit to Canada in her 50th year, the Toronto Sun printed an editorial saying, "She's out being given the top hat and curtsy treatment as if she were something special rather than a royal baggage who has by her lifestyle forfeited all right to respect and homage." This was unusual for Canada because they were always loyal to the royal family, so this upset the courtiers at the Buckingham Palace. If the Queen were to be present at an event with Roddy there, it would be like giving her official approval. Queen Elizabeth told Princess Margaret she had to protect the monarchy before her sister, and she was sovereign first and sister second. So this is the first time in their lives that the sisters were in conflict, but they came up with a compromise. They had Roddy go out to eat first, and then he would arrive with the less important guests for dancing. That evening, he stayed away from the Queen and Prince Philip and danced with Princess Margaret when the Queen had gone. A few weeks before Roddy had celebrated his 33rd birthday, he was reunited with a dark-haired fashion designer named Tatiana Soskin. Princess Margaret didn't attend the party, and soon Roddy and Tanya were starting to see each other and within months decided to get married. Roddy told Princess Margaret in February 1981 while they were on holiday in Mostique. Margaret was shocked but understanding and gracious and urged him to propose as soon as possible. Princess Margaret announced she was happy for him and said, "Anyway, I couldn't have afforded him much longer." She even threw them a small luncheon party at Kensington Palace. It was the end of an 8-year relationship. Princess Margaret rededicated herself to the Queen. When Prince Charles was born, Princess Margaret became known as Charlie's aunt. After he took Princess Diana as his bride, Princess Margaret was put out to pasture. But she didn't mind being out of the press stories, and the Queen invited newspaper editors to Buckingham Palace and politely asked them to give some privacy to Princess Diana. Princess Margaret tried to make Diana feel at home. She took her to the theater, joined her at social events, took her shopping, and showed her the ropes. Princess Diana appreciated. She said, "I've always adored Margot. I loved her to bits, and she's been wonderful to me from day one." When Diana had returned home from the hospital with baby William, Margaret got the staff together to rush outside and wave handkerchiefs and tea towels as the mother and the baby drove by. Both of them had said that clothes weren't their prime concern, but fashion writers insisted on treating them as if they were from Dynasty. So when Diana and Prince Charles got back from their honeymoon, Princess Diana felt like an outsider. She felt like Prince Charles always deferred to the Queen and the Queen Mother, rather than taking her needs into consideration. When there was a barbecue with the family, Princess Diana stayed in her room. Her refusing to fit in irritated the Queen. Princess Margaret said to the Queen that she should cut her some slack. Let her do what she likes. She told the Queen to leave her alone and she would be all right. The Queen didn't like confrontation, so she took Margaret's advice. During this time, Princess Margaret became a guard for the Queen. She would do and say things that she knew the sister agreed with, but because of democracy, couldn't say herself. The book Elizabeth and Margaret said Margaret could be intimidating, infuriating, and exasperating, but the Queen loved the woman with the eager mind, the crisp response, and the waspish wit. The Queen was secretly pleased when Princess Margaret got the better of Prince Philip if they argued. The Queen Mother, and Princess Margaret spoke on the phone most days, sometimes in French, or they mimicked an accent. They all had their own lives, but they relied on one another. The Queen found it hard to relax unless she was surrounded by those she felt at home with. With Princess Margaret, she felt the most at home, even though they were so different. In this new decade of 1980, Princess Margaret dedicated herself to the crown. She said everything she did was to support the Queen and to help her. She lost weight and got an operation to get rid of her. She got rid of her double chin, and this gave her confidence. On behalf of her sister, she visited West Germany, the Far East, and Canada. When she traveled overseas, she carried a small silver frame photograph of the Queen. She would hang it on her wall or put it on her dresser. She would go to visits, as she wrote in her diary, most of them unpublicized, to charities, regiments, and other bodies she had been associated with. She was the first royal to visit people with AIDS, but no one noticed. She did it years before Diana. The following year, she went on a desert island disc, and she picked Sophie Tucker's Red Hot Mama, and she picked flag-waving tunes like Rule Britannia and Scotland the Brave. She joked if she was alone on an island, she would dance like a ballerina and probably have been beautiful because the world wouldn't be watching her for once. At this point in her life, there wasn't any drama with her male friends. They were age-appropriate, discreet, and acceptable. The first one she was linked to was Mario di Urso, and a wealthy Italian banker several years her junior. Then there was an Irish property owner, an antique dealer named Ned Ryan. He was able to get her out of bed at 6:30 a.m. instead of 11 a.m., and they would go to antique markets to look for prime silver. She enjoyed his banter. Then there was Eton-educated businessman Norman Lonsdale, a widower, descended from the Duke of Wellington. He went with her on holidays to Italy and wined and dined her around London. In 1992, Peter Townsend arrived at Kensington Palace for a reunion. It had been 34 years. He was older, of course, grayer and slower, but when asked how he was, she stated simply, "He hasn't changed at all." They had lunch together, and after talking for a while on the sofa, they said goodbye, and they never saw each other again. During this time, a senior civil servant named Derek Jennings converted to Catholicism and later became a priest. Margaret, a high church Anglican, considered converting. It was only her loyalty to Queen Elizabeth that she remained Anglican. Queen Elizabeth was happy Princess Margaret remained by her side, and on her 60th birthday she was recognized for her service by getting the Royal Victorian Chain, the highest-ranking award in the Royal Victorian Order. Princess Margaret, according to her lady-in-waiting Janie Stevens, said, "She was always saying, 'My poor sister,' whenever anything went wrong." The princess was with her during the worst year, 1992. First, there was the separation of the Duke and Duchess of York. Then Princess Anne divorced Mark Phillips. Then there was a fire at Windsor Castle in November. During the fire, the Queen, dressed in a green rain mac and a matching hat, looking at the smoldering ruins, and looked devastated. The castle had been her home most of her life. She went to Royal Lodge and spent the weekend with Princess Margaret and the Queen Mother, and she was nearly inconsolable. Then came the separation of Prince and Princess of Wales in December. The book, Diana, Her True Story, revealed her difficulties in the royal family and her husband's affairs. And there was also embarrassing moments. First, there was the Squidgy Gate tapes where Diana secretly recorded on the telephone talking to an amorous admirer, James Gilby. He called her Squidgy, and there was conversations criticizing the royal family. The worst was Fergie being in the papers with pictures of the Duchess of York having her toes sucked by her financial advisor, John Bruin, by the side of a pool in the south of France, and her two younger daughters were looking on. This happened while she was visiting Balmoral Castle to discuss future arrangements now that she was separated from Prince Andrew. When she came down to breakfast, everybody was reading the paper. The Queen was in her sitting room and called for Fergie, and she was mad. The Queen loved Fergie so much she couldn't believe that Fergie had been so stupid to allow it to happen. And Philip bluntly told her, "You should go to a nunnery or a madhouse." Princess Margaret wrote Fergie a letter saying that Fergie had brought shame to the family more than she could imagine. She said Fergie never hung her head in embarrassment and never considered the damage she had caused. Well, Fergie felt there were double standards because she didn't know she was being photographed, and Margaret was the photographer when 3 naked men pranced before her on Moustique. Fergie was crying about the letter and sent Princess Margaret a large bouquet of flowers, hoping for forgiveness, but they were returned. Princess Margaret never really cared for Fergie. She felt she was coarse and greedy. The Queen's former secretary, Lord Chatteris, said Sarah Ferguson was not cut out to be a royal princess in this or any other age. He called her a vulgarina. Vulgar, vulgar, vulgar. Prince Philip wasn't her fan either, but he wanted to salvage the marriage between Prince Charles and Diana. When the separation of Prince Charles and Princess Diana began, Princess Margaret had given Diana the benefit of the doubt, and she wrote to Prince Charles saying she would continue to meet with Diana. But this ended when Princess Diana questioned the Queen and her husband in public. Princess Margaret had been her staunchest supporter of her within the family. She wrote Diana a wounding and excoriating letter following her controversial performance at the BBC Panorama program. Diana was devastated by Margaret's hostility. She agreed with the Queen, asking the couple to divorce as soon as legally possible, and she supported the move to remove her Royal Highness title. Princess Margaret was hurt by Diana's interview. She had been her ally and friend. She had asked the Queen to give Diana a break back when they had first been married, and she thought this is how she repays the royal family. She was so angry and upset that she had every magazine thrown out that had Diana on the cover. She cut off all contact with her and made it clear to her children that she didn't want them fraternizing with the enemy. When Princess Diana died in August 1997, she had no standing with the royal family. The last time she had seen the Queen was the previous March. Margaret and the other royals had nothing to do with her for the last several years. Princess Margaret was upset for Prince William and Prince Harry when Princess Diana died, saying that it was terrible to lose your mother at that age, and with little Harry's birthday only a few days away. At Balmoral in early conversations, Princess Margaret's view was that the family should have as little to do with the funeral as absolutely necessary. She complained about Princess Diana, saying the fuss the unfortunate girl who married my nephew has caused. She thought it should be a private funeral for a private citizen, and she wasn't the only one. The Queen Mother sided with Prince Charles and had never cared for Princess Diana. Her concern was for the great-grandchildren. The large number of crowds outside the palace had the Queen convinced by senior royal advisors, including Tony Blair, of the need for a special funeral for Diana. Princess Margaret said what her sister could not. She didn't think that Diana's coffin should rest in the Chapel Royal, nor did she feel that the Union Jack should fly at half-mast above Buckingham Palace. Princess Margaret told the press that the dye thing was all too much. The flowers on the paths everywhere were just awful. She said later she was speaking of for Diana when she said that. She said Diana would have hated it. She wouldn't have wanted all the fuss about her. She would have insisted that the flowers go to hospices. Princess Margaret didn't like the frenzy of it all. She was brought up not to show feelings in public, so her and the Queen found all the wailing hard to understand. They didn't believe in showing private grief on a public sleeve. The day of the funeral, standing outside the gates of Buckingham Palace, waiting for the gun carriage that was carrying Diana's body, Princess Margaret started to talking about improvising the restrooms at Buckingham Palace to her sister. Then when the funeral passed by, the Queen respectfully bowed her head, while Princess Margaret gave a nod and looked like she wanted to be somewhere else. She never forgave Princess Diana for betraying the royal family. The royal family remained silent and stony-faced when thousands outside applauded Charles Spencer's eulogy, praising Diana, and he took a swipe at the royal house of Windsor. Before Margaret left for Tuscany, she wrote a note to her sister thanking her for how kindly she had arranged everybody's lives and had made life tolerable for the 2 poor boys. She told Elizabeth, "You listening to everyone and deciding on all the issues. I just felt you were wonderful." In reality, during the funeral week, she had been reacting to events rather than controlling them. She was agitated and alarmed by the hostility of the crowds when she returned to London from Balmoral, and she showed composure and steely resolve that came from a lifetime of training. So I'm going to end the video here. We find that Princess Margaret, when her fling with Roddy was over, put her mind set on helping out her sister and was a protector. She even changed her mind about turning to Catholicism because of the Queen. The 1980s and the 1990s were periods of tough moments for Queen Elizabeth and Princess Margaret, but they pulled through them by relying on each other, as they had all their lives. The next video will be the end of the series based on the book, Elizabeth and Margaret, and it's been a great book to find out so many things I didn't know about. I hope you have enjoyed the series as much as I have doing the videos. I hope everybody has been having a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Thank you.